Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman, your host for the next hour. This is the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Today is Thursday, March 1st, year of our Lord 2018. I have a special show for you today. I'm really excited about the guest. I'll announce him in a little bit. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. Also, you can find me on there, facebook.com/Suzanne Sherman or Cowgirl Esquire. I have two pages, and one you'll see it has some mountains in the background. The other has Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello. I'd appreciate it if you'd follow that one as well. Sometimes I have an overlap, sometimes I don't. And of course, like I said, we also have a fan page for the radio station CRN. So that's facebook.com/CRN. That's our fan page, and we try to keep that lively and the discussion going as well. You can also hear me on Tuesday mornings at the same hour at the 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Mountain Time out here on the local conservative talk radio network, K-Talk Radio in Sandy, Utah. If you're not in the immediate area and can't receive it, that's not a problem. Just go over to their webpage, ktalkmedia.com, and you have an opportunity to stream live. They also have shows that are archived there. I've been on Shooting You Straight with Maxon and Platts. Prepper Talk Radio is also there. I've also appeared on that show several times. And the morning show I'm on every Tuesday is Inside the News with Paul Jensen. There we cover some current events, and I throw my constitutional spin on modern day events as well. You know, we still haven't forgotten our original motto of the network, which is 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers. We like to take the thought processes, the philosophies of those that lived in a time when rational thought dominated the debate of the times and apply those to the issues that we have today. And we'll be discussing the recent shooting in Parkland, Florida. The media focus tends to be on the two ends of a spectrum. We have further gun laws, bans, etc. And we also have the argument that we just simply need to make these schools safer. And by doing that, we have arming of teachers. President Trump has chimed in on that with the idea of using federal grants to reward teachers financially who choose to become armed in the classrooms. He's also said that he's amenable to doing away or temporarily doing away with due process to take away the firearms of those that the government deems unstable or an imminent threat. Neither solution coming from the federal government, by the way, is constitutional, nor is it really practical. But what we're not really talking about has been the issue of the schools themselves. Why are they making people unhappy? We have a show on the network that is brand new. It's called The Other Side, and Justin and Mike, the co-hosts for that show, are both public school teachers. And Mike and I did a special edition of his show, The Other Side, the other day. So go over, you can find that on our page, and you can listen to that show if you're so inclined. And he had some very good perspective because he's there in the trenches as a teacher on his thoughts on whether it's a good idea for the teachers to be armed as well. I don't know if I asked you already, but if you haven't done so, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. You will get notices when these shows come on up, and you can also go there and download or listen at your leisure if you've missed any episodes of The Paradigm Shift, which is hosted by my good friend Jeff Johnson, who also produces this show. I could not do this show without him, so go check out The Paradigm Shift. We have rebroadcasts of Brushfires of Freedom. A good friend of ours, Sean Hoffine in Tucson, Arizona, broadcasts on Sundays, and we have those available for on our radio co-feed that you can listen to. Mike Meharry from the 10th Amendment Center also is doing some new podcasts, as well as we have some old ones with Mike Meharry and Peter Schiff Gold podcasts if you're interested in learning about whether or not it's a good idea to invest in gold. I'm going to be delving into this issue of the FBI in a moment. But what I want to do is we also have not forgotten our roots. I do discuss preparedness, survival issues, and we came across something the other day, and I thought it would just behoove us to take a few minutes because the weather's starting to shift, as we know right now. It is March 1st. That spring will be here very soon. People are going to start hitting the outdoors. It's very important to remember, just because the weather's nice when you go out, things can change. We had an incident in Arkansas. A man went out. He was unprepared for cold weather and torrential rain, and they don't know what the cause of his death was, but they found his body near a waterfall over this last weekend. Glenn Wheeler, and this is from a local outlet in Arkansas. I think I posted the link actually on my Suzanne Sherman page with Monticello. Glenn Wheeler was an investigator and search and rescue coordinator in the sheriff's office for Newton County, Arkansas, SO. He said authorities just learned the man had told some family members he had planned to go hiking. That's one thing he did right. Tell your family where you were going to go, but be a little bit more specific. Don't just say I'm going hiking. Tell people exactly where you plan to be and when you plan to be back. If something happens, it significantly narrows the area before they have to look for you. Not only that, it takes a lot of the time out where they have to narrow it down so they can get to you quicker if you are incapacitated. 2 hikers had found his body. His name was Martin Lopez, 27 years old. His car was found at a trailhead, and he was above a waterfall and just off a side trail where he was found. And that was concerning to me, just off a side trail. They have these trails for a reason. You would be amazed how easily it is for you to get lost and lose your way if you go off a trail a little bit. So unless you are experienced in the outdoors and know how to return and follow your way back, stay on the trails. You know, it'll save you a lot of heartache. They found no signs of trauma. Authorities didn't think he had fallen from a cliff. He was not wearing any rain gear, and there was no sign of a backpack, though they said it was possible his backpack might have washed away during heavy storms over the weekend. So one was not located in the area, meaning his backpack. They are still investigating, and here are some of the bits of advice they give you. If you plan to go hiking, here are some good safety tips. Jeff and I will elaborate on this for a few moments, and then we're going to head over to the topic of my show today, and that's going to be the FBI. But just getting back to the article, don't go hiking by yourself, and always tell someone where you are going, a trail you'll be on, and when you'll be back. Have plenty of water and high-calorie food with you. Don't wear cotton clothing that absorbs water and will not keep you warm if it gets wet. Synthetic material dries out faster. Wool clothing will keep you warm even if it's wet. Have a way to stay dry: a rain jacket, a poncho, a tarp, or a tent. You know what is really effective for this, and it takes up hardly any space and zero weight? A trash bag. Just take a hefty bag with you if you have to. You can get these little 99-cent ponchos as well, but even just a garbage bag. I have a tarp in all of my packs when I go out into the wilderness at all times. Basic survival gear, including several ways to make a fire, a knife, a compass, a map of the area laminated in plastic or enclosed in a plastic bag. Small medical kit. Jeff, that's your thing there, your IFAK. Headlamp or a flashlight with extra batteries. Sunscreen, at this point, I'm not really concerned about getting a sunburn, but, if you have the room, that's a good idea. Extra clothing, compressible down jacket for when the temperature drops. If lost, most rescuers advise staying put. Build a shelter and focus on making yourself more visible to rescuers. Finding someone who is lost becomes much more difficult if that person is on the move, because they may have canvassed that area and written it off. So, Jeff, how about some thoughts from you on this? I know the IFAK and being prepared for some medical issues could literally mean life or death out there.
Right. If he had, well, obviously they don't find any signs of trauma. So, he really didn't need a med kit in this situation, but he certainly needed fire starting equipment. He needed warm clothes, dry clothes. He needed rain gear. He needed a pack. I mean, if he didn't have a pack with him, he was completely unprepared to be in the outdoors. And you and I agree that if you're going to go out, I mean, I go out in my truck. There's a pack on the back seat of my truck. Every time it stays in my truck. It goes with me. You just be prepared. If you're going to go out, don't go out unprepared, especially in the mountains. I was telling Suzanne before the show, two very experienced hikers. When I lived in Colorado, we went to Longs Peak, which is a 14,000-foot peak in Colorado. We went the first weekend in September. They were out the last weekend of August. They were trapped in a cave overnight on the mountain above tree line in a snowstorm. They survived because they had all the equipment they needed to survive the night, and then the next day they were rescued by the forest, the ranger service. So just be prepared if you go out.
Yeah, we'll have some more on that as the weather starts turning to summer, and dedicate even some shows to that. Ryan McMacken from Mises.org was on my show on Monday, and we discussed, you know what, I don't remember what we discussed, Jeff, but he has an article that is about what I have been saying right now in light of this recent revelation that the FBI was completely ineffective with regards to preventing this school. They knew about Nicholas Cruz. They knew about his violent propensities and the threats he had made, yet they chose to sit on it and do nothing. And one of the things I had been saying is, we need to re-examine Waco. We need to re-examine Ruby Ridge, Lavoy Finicum, Bundy Ranch. I mean, we could go on, and I will get more into that later. But I also said it's time to abolish the FBI. And lo and behold, in July 7th, 2016, Ryan had already published an article saying, abolish the FBI. I'm going to touch on that before I bring my guest on, who is Jim Bovard. But what he says here is James Comey lives off the sweat of the American taxpayer, just like all government employees and employees of the FBI. His large salary will be converted into a generous pension. And like most federal employees in high-ranking positions as his, he continues to look forward to decades of living at a standard of living far above what is experienced by people like you and me, Jeff. And to maintain this life of comfort, all he had to do was agree to look the other way as a powerful politician, clearly by his own admission, broke federal law. Remember when he had that speech, when he said that it would be unfair to charge Hillary Clinton with a multitude of felonies, but what he did was go a step further and went out of his way to best ensure that no federal prosecutor would proceed with such charges, which he claimed no reasonable prosecutor would proceed with the charges. Now, that's unprecedented. He would either say that we found no evidence, but it was not within his responsibility, the realm of his responsibility, to say no reasonable prosecutor. Well, that brings in, again, the discussion that we had with, who is the AG? Her name is escaping me right now, that met on the tarmac with Bill Clinton. I've already forgotten her name. Jeff, help me out here.
Believe it or not, I drew a blank on her name too. She was that memorable.
Oh my gosh, it'll come to me later. I'll go, oh my gosh, Suzanne, you're such an idiot. So there are precedents for this. When Nixon was ordered to fire a special prosecutor for Watergate, Attorney General Elliot Richardson resigned rather than to do what the president mandated. Now, he's bringing this up because Comey could have resigned rather than played this game here. And the article's long. I'm going to post it because I think it's a very good one. But he points out here a history of abuse. There's obviously untrue for anyone to not suffering from, hold on. So the reality and the romance has always been two totally different things about the FBI. And it's helpful to remind ourselves that it was the FBI that was in charge of Waco. And that's going to bring me to my guest here, Jim Bovard, who has written articles about Waco and done extensive research. It was the FBI raid that led on Randy Weaver's house led to an FBI sniper shooting a woman in the head while she was holding her 10-month baby. The FBI spied on Martin Luther King and targeted on peaceful anti-war organizations for political reasons during the 60s and 70s. It was the FBI that came of age arresting opponents in the First World War. We'll get into this a little bit because, interestingly enough, the FBI was a government solution that came about to compete against private agency for investigation and security, and that was the Pinkerton Agency. So the FBI, I have said all along, is unconstitutional. It is a national security organization that works closely with many partners around the country. And what this article here says is it faces issues of national security threats facing the nation. And I kind of have to disagree with that, because here we have the FBI involved, and we have these local agencies that were alerted to the issues with the school. Why are they ignoring these but focusing on other local issues? So it should be noted that the FBI was not created to fill a hole that the law enforcement needs. Now, again, this is where he talks about the Pinkerton Agency was already fulfilling this purpose. Government-run police organizations have long been shown to be inefficient and prone to corruption, which is why the private sector had turned to private security instead. So you can get Jim on the phone while I wrap this up a little bit.
Okay.
But what we have
he's already
here,
on. When you're ready for him, he's already on. So I call it. Okay.
Thank you so much. So, one thing I'm going to say, and I am not going to attribute this, this is my assessment and mine only, not Jim's, not Jeff's, but when we had all this hullabaloo over this memo and the out and out, irrefutable, overwhelming evidence of the corruption within the FBI for quite some time now, and with the memo discussion, I thought, what's the next distraction going to be? And here we have it. Can I say that this was intentional? No, I'm not going to say this was intentional. They knew about this guy, though, and they sat on their hands, did nothing, and now we have an event. And it seems to me how convenient this is. Wouldn't it be better for the FBI to be viewed instead now as simply inept as opposed to profoundly corrupt? So that's my take on that. That being said, I want to read a quick bio for Jim Bovard. He's coming with me today. I'm delighted that he accepted my invitation to come on the show. He is a USA Today columnist. He has written 10 books, including Public Policy Hooligan, Attention Deficit Democracy, The Bush Betrayal, and Lost Rights, The Destruction of American Liberty. He is a frequent contributor to The Hill. We will be discussing some of his work from The Hill today. And he has written for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Playboy, and the Washington Post, New Republic, Reader's Digest. Wall Street Journal has referred to him as the roving inspector general of the modern states. The New York Times, the anti-czar czar. Washington Post calls him one-man truth squad. Here's where it gets really good. His writings have been publicly denounced by the chief of the FBI, the chief of the TSA, the Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the Postmaster General, and chiefs of the United States International Trade Commission. We could go on, but standing ovation for you, James Bovard. Welcome to the show. This is the Wasatch Report. How are you today?
Hey, doing good. Thanks for having me on, Suzanne.
Well, I was delighted when you accepted. I'm so glad to have you on here. I have been saying with these recent revelations, we need to address the other cases too, not just the memo and the inefficiency at their handling of this incident in Florida, but we need to re-examine Waco. And on the 27th of February was the 25th anniversary of Waco, and you published with some up-to-date commentary your works at the time when you discussed Waco. So let's get into your work on that. I mean, we also need to look at Ruby Ridge, Lavoy Finnegan, and get into this. But today, why don't you back us up and tell us a little bit about your reporting on Waco and what the plan was initially for the interaction. You said something very telling in your article, that there was no plan for a peaceful interaction here.
No, it's interesting. The evidence came out long after the raid, but it was pretty much of a PR stunt. The folks in the ATF wanted to get headlines and TV coverage. They invited several television crews to follow them, and to film their triumph as they launched a military style attack on a residence with a lot of women and children. And it's interesting. It's interesting how the government was able to bottle up some of the key information until years after the trial and years after the final FBI assault that left the place in flames. For instance, most folks are not aware that 9 days before the ATF raid, there were two undercover agents who David Koresh and other Davidians recognized, knocked on the door of the Branch Davidians' home and invited David Koresh to go shooting with them. David Koresh did that, and there were two agents, and Koresh and two other Davidians. The five of them had a nice time shooting a couple of AR-15s and some other 6-hour semi-auto pistols, and much of the ammo came from Koresh. Yet the whole rationale of the massive ATF raid on 25 years ago was that it was impossible to arrest Koresh outside of his home. And this is such a brazen lie to start with, and it was layered upon other falsehoods, and yet the media still treats with deference a lot of the federal claims that led to this unnecessary confrontation and a lot of innocent people dead.
So you had also mentioned in your articles an interview with Leslie Stahl and Bill Clinton, and they asked, and could you discuss what he said on that interview? I believe this was on 60 Minutes shortly after the event occurred.
That's right. Let's see. Let me pull that up here. Yeah, this was. I think this might have been 2 years after the assault, when they were getting ready. Congress was finally getting ready to do some hearings on this. There was finally some pushback on this, but it was just amazing. Okay, here we go. Any second thoughts on the raid? Those people murdered a bunch of innocent law enforcement officials. He also said that those people in the cult compound had murdered their own children. And there had been a trial the previous year in which the Branch Davidian defendants were not convicted on murder. But it was typical PR strategy of Clinton and a lot of his appointees to demonize the Branch Davidians as if they had launched an attack on federal officials. This is not unusual for cases where the government enforcement goes awry and people shoot back. The government says, well, it's the victim's fault because they shot back. It's an unusual theory for a free society.
Boy, isn't that the truth? Do you know what it was that initially caught the attention of the federal government? It seems like these people were not doing anything violent. We're not causing trouble in their hometown. In fact, I have a friend on Facebook who actually knew David Koresh, and I'm trying to figure out here what first got themselves in the sights of the federal government.
Well, the Branch Davidians were active at a number of gun shows, which they had licenses for. There were things that they would make, like they would take the holes from hand grenades that had been emptied out and use them to be paperweights or stuff like that. It's interesting if you look at the actual search warrant that the ATF used. The ATF search warrant mentioned that that folks had seen publications such as Shotgun News at the Branch Davidian residence, and there was also a video made by the Gun Owners of America criticizing the ATF. These are the things which they mention in the search warrant application. It's like, well, okay, so what does this have to do with you know, a violation of federal firearms law. Nothing. But the fact that those were included is symptomatic of the you know, of the ATF's attempt to vilify David Koresh and the Branch Davidians.
Again, for what I'm failing to see as any unlawful behavior here. So let's get into a little bit about, there was a trial for 5 members of the Branch Davidians, and again, I think Bill Clinton said that they were convicted of murder, they were convicted of manslaughter, which has entirely different legal ramifications. Were you about to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so there was a video that you mentioned in your article as well that was supposed to support the claim that the Branch Davidians had fired first upon the FBI agents, yet that video was never produced at the trial.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that video referred to the ATF claiming that the Branch Davidians had fired first on the ATF agents who arrived on cattle trailers 25 years ago, and the feds were not able to find that video, or not able to come up with it. But we were still supposed to take their words, even though some of the first investigations by the federal government's own lawyers, talking to the agents who were there on the day of the raid, found that the agents were saying the ATF had fired first, which is why the federal government stopped all internal investigation of this, because they were very concerned about generating Brady Act material for the defense lawyers.
So, you know, and I used to practice. Go ahead.
No. And I was going to say, and since you're a lawyer, you can explain that to the audience.
Yes,
much better than I could.
Just what I was about to do. Now, when you have a criminal trial, the ultimate goal is to achieve justice. It is not to just achieve a conviction. It is also not to achieve getting your client acquitted if he was in fact guilty. Both sides must present evidence that can show guilt if you're of the defense. The prosecutor also must provide exculpatory evidence. It is a situation in which there is full disclosure. It is the burden upon the people pursuing or prosecuting the case to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. But information must be disclosed by both parties. So it seems here what we have is exculpatory evidence being hidden from the defense, if that is a fair assessment.
Right, and it was actually even worse than that, because as soon as the supervisors in the Treasury Department, ATF was part of Treasury at that point, as soon as they realized that, oh, it was our side that may have shot first, they simply stopped investigating and stopped asking questions, which is part of the reason why the folks in government agencies don't learn from their debacles, because they just get a bigger broom to sweep stuff under the rug, which is what the ATF tried to do at Waco.
And, you know, I referred to this, and we're seeing this again 25 years later. We haven't learned much. I refer to what we have as a trifecta of evil that is keeping the facts away from us, keeping us dumbed down, keeping us on this march towards gravitating towards big government to solve our problems. So here we had government corruption here going after this group of individuals. They lied about their intent. We had the media joining in with them by justifying it. And I still see this if we have these debates right now, social media, or even in person with people, they say, well, they had all these kids there that they were abusing, and these people were crazy. Well, okay, thank goodness they saved the kids from abuse. They killed them all. We're going to get into a little bit of what these children went through with these tear gas containers that were dropped in on them. And of course, the media supports this, and we're seeing this. And now, fast forward to today, when we talk about the education system as the third part of this trifecta of evil, they have raised a little generation of these Marxists that are now on a rampage, because all of a sudden their high school has been affected by violence, and they want to obviously ban guns because clearly that's the only solution. And Jeff and I did a show Sunday night, talking about how Agenda 21 principles have infiltrated the schools. And one of their goals to get their one world government is to steal or indoctrinate a generation of children. And we're seeing this come to fruition now. So that's a little bit of a side note, but kind of tying this all in together. So we have now ostensibly some ATF violations. I don't understand why the ATF could not have peacefully arrested David Koresh when he was coming to and from town. But I think you addressed that at the start of the show when you came on and said this was really a publicity stunt.
Right. And, you know, it's even worse than that because, you know, back in the previous summer, an ATF agent had visited a gun dealer who dealt often with David Koresh, and the ATF agent mentioned his concerns that the Branch Davidians were converting a semi-auto to full auto and thereby violating federal law. And the thing that the gun dealer did is pick up the phone and called Koresh, and David Koresh invited the ATF agent to come over to the Branch Davidians' home and do an inspection on the spot. So, I mean, this is something which got swept under the rug so immensely, and yet it goes to the heart of the federal motivation and, you know, proper conduct.
And when we're talking about proper conduct here, I don't understand. Maybe I'm just really thick. I'm just not figuring out what their motivation would have been to target these people that had not been doing anything unlawful. It was probably a lifestyle that was not, you know, normal for, or considered normal. They had a compound with all these people together, lived a private life. But the fact that he invited them for an on-spot inspection really tears apart the entire narrative that it was necessary to show up with tanks and about 100 federal agents. And this almost reminds me of what happened at the Bundy Ranch situation, where, yes, the Bundys didn't pay cattle fee, and there was a discussion or a disagreement over whether or not it was owed to the general government in the first place. But be that as it may, at the very same time we had this going on, we have a section of our border with Texas that has actually been ceded to we've lost our sovereignty because they said this area is just too dangerous for Americans to go through. It's part of our national park system, but you can't go there because the drug cartels, the traffickers have taken over. Don't go here, or if you do, you do so at your own risk. Obama's justification was, well, we do not have the resources to secure this area. But lo and behold, when we have a white rancher out in Nevada thumbing his nose at the general government, boy, howdy, did we have the resources to attend to that. I really see an inconsistency or a consistency in their disingenuous behavior. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
There's lots of paradoxes there.
You know, do you recall, we'll get back onto the Waco situation in just a moment, but a few years back, I believe there was a story that was covered extensively in the news of white Christian militias and plots to set off bombs at police officers' funerals and wreak havoc. I don't know if you remember that, but some people were arrested and they focused on white Christian militia. These people were all brought in thanks to an FBI CI, a confidential informant. And when these individuals were released, charges were dismissed. You heard nothing about it in the news. So we have once again, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I might have heard a little bit about it, but it was interesting that there was an effort, you know, that may have started even before the Obama administration to kind of paint gun owners and people who spoke up for the Second Amendment as quasi-terrorists or terrorist suspects or dangerous extremists. The Homeland Security Department was bankrolling fusion centers, so-called fusion centers all over the country, and part of what these fusion centers did was make up lists of potential enemies and people who were gun owners or libertarians or probably fundamental Christians lots of those folks showed up on those lists, even though there was not a solid basis to suspect them of criminal behavior or dangerous threat. This is what the government does when the ball starts rolling down the hill. It's like, okay, you know, we need a bigger budget, so we need to make a longer list of enemies.
Well, and exactly. And the people that seem to be informed and able to speak out about them and their corruption are the very ones that they were targeting when Obama took office. And Napolitano, when she was appointed DHS, she was secretary of the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, I believe. She had said, we are going to now look out for people that are possible domestic terrorists. Those include constitutionalists, survivalists, veterans. They put out a word at sporting goods stores, be on the lookout for individuals buying a certain amount of survival goods. Anybody that has more than the suggested FEMA 72-hour maximum supply. You know what? I live out in the mountains. It is feasible. I'd been snowed in here for a week at a time. I'd be crazy to just have 72 hours of supplies on hand. Yet people like me would be considered potential domestic terrorists. Add that now to the fact that I'm openly discussing their corruption and how this government has become literally unlawful. And, you know, but the individuals that support them, those are just fine. Antifa, the rioters, these people need more space. We have government and the media very skewed on who they want to protect and who they don't. The FBI, now bringing us back to the topic of this conversation in Comey, where I started it out, shows that the government and the FBI really exist to protect government officials and go after those that decry the government corruption. Let's turn our attention a moment here, unless you wanted to comment on that.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I want to focus because you spent so much time on this right when this happened, and the information here is very detailed. The attack itself, as we know so far, just to sum up what we've covered, there really was not any unlawful activity that would have gotten their attention. There was no exigent circumstances, no reason for them to storm this compound. As you said, it was more of a publicity stunt. They showed up with tanks. Did the ATF really have tanks, you said in this article? And
no.
Okay.
No, it was the FBI who had the tanks.
Okay. Well, that's much better. So we have So we have them coming up to this compound, women and children. By the way, women and children, federal government attack surrounding a compound. I'm kind of thinking Wounded Knee here as well, by the way. We have a history of this behavior. So let's talk a little bit about, we have an incident where the tanks had actually come into contact and knocked part of the compound over, and also a type of a tear gas. You refer to this as CS gas that was pumped into the compound for 6 hours. There were women and children in this compound. Can you please explain the effect that this would have, what the warnings were for this effect, what the warnings were for this gas, and how it affected the children? Let's look a little bit at what you told people, what these people went through.
Well, the CS gas can kill people. It was something which was originally, I think, designed for use outside as a riot control tactic, but it has killed. It's killed even prior to the the FBI attack at Waco. A lot of people had died in the Middle East when it was used on them. But what the feds did was pump it inside this ramshackle, sprawling old building. And even though Janet Reno had been warned that there would not be any gas mask that could work for children and babies, and so it's a very dangerous thing to use inside for everybody. But it also can there's a big risk of flammability from this, and so you pump this in there, and people are having trouble breathing, and then there's a higher risk of a fire breaking out. And then we find out 6 years later that the FBI did use pyrotechnic devices to launch them at the Branch Davidians' home. So a huge part of the federal narrative after the April 19th FBI attack was that the feds had absolutely zero blame for any fire. But they managed to cover up the pyrotechnics that they used. But even aside from that, the feds were using flashbang hand grenades, and these are ones that have caused fires in a number of no-knock raids when they've been used by police departments around the country.
Suzanne, can I just jump in here real quick? Being law enforcement, we use CS. CS in the confined space, there is a lethal limit. You can pump so much in, it will actually kill the people in the structure if you pump too much in. You have to know what that lethal limit is. And if, I don't know what the structure was, so I can't comment on that part of it, but there is an there is a limit. If you put too much in, it will kill the people. Secondly, they will cause fires. There's a flame that comes out the end of them that dispenses the CS gas. It's basically a smoke that carries a crystal, and the crystal is what actually it makes it hard to breathe. It kind of burns in your chest and in your sinuses and eyes and everything. So that's just my take on that as far as that goes.
Also, Jim points out in the article, as well as he just mentioned, that the federal officials after the fire insisted that the gas was non-flammable. But he also mentions that we have U.S. Army manuals that say there is a significant risk of flammability from the CS gas particulates. We mentioned the crystals earlier. The U.S. Army Field Manual FM 2127 states, I'm going to quote here from his article, warning, when using the dry agent CS1, do not discharge indoors. Accumulating dust may explode when exposed to spark or open flame. Retired Army Colonel Rex Applegate, one of the nation's foremost experts on riot control agents, declared in a recent interview, any flashbang will start fires. Now, here we have government agencies, FBI, ATF, they should have known this, yet they proceeded to continue in light of this information. I'm wondering what risk. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think you were leading to a question. Go ahead and
I'm just saying,
go to the question.
I'm not sure what risk these people posed at this time. They were clearly surrounded. They weren't going to harm anyone at this time. And I don't remember how many days. I remember this went on the news where they were surrounded. How many days was this? Was this almost a month?
No, I think it was around 53 days, something like that. I'm a little bit off, but yeah. So the ATF came in February 28th, and the FBI launched their final attack on April 19th.
So let's get into a little bit about what you reported, what the children went through. I mean, the government is so intent on making sure that not another child suffers in a school shooting. Let's see what they did to, I think 80 people perished at Waco, 26 children. Why don't you go into a little bit about what these people went through?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, they didn't have gas masks that would fit for them. There was a senior science advisor for the EPA pointed out that the CS gas would have up to 20 times as harsh an impact on children as it did on adults. He also mentioned that the FBI failed to read and follow the label's directions on the use of CS gas. So they simply didn't pay that much attention to it. There were other warnings. There was a comment by Congressman John Micah at 1995 hearings. He said that even if the children there in the Waco ramshackle building did not die directly from the CS gas, quote, we sure as hell torture them for 6 hours before they died.
Let that sink in. We tortured them for 6 hours before they died. You also mentioned how Janet Reno kept changing her rationale for the final assault. Immediately after the fire, she justified it as they needed to stop David Koresh from beating babies. Well, clearly the solution is to just torture them and burn them to death. her rationale just seems so disconnected from reality, and that how stupid does she think we are that people are going to go for this? She said, first and foremost, the reason for the tank gas assault was that law enforcement agents on the ground concluded that the perimeter had become unstable and posed a risk both to them and surrounding home and farms. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, this is something which Janet Reno, a comment she made in a speech to law enforcement, federal law enforcement officials in May of 1995. And it was interesting because this is something which was very surprising at the time, because this was something that would seem to be invented out of whole cloth as far as a ex post facto rationale for a tank and CS gas assault on women and children and men. But it's interesting. It was totally bogus to raise the specter at Waco. It was different at Ruby Ridge because, as you might recall, and you've probably talked about this on the show, back in August, September 1992, when the feds came in, when the FBI sniper killed Vicki Weaver after a U.S. Marshal had shot the day before Sammy Weaver in the back and killed him. The feds came in there. They put the FBI snipers to circle the Weaver cabin. There were a lot of other support officials coming in. But what was happening, from what I've read, was that there were a lot of other people in northern Idaho, in that area, who were very unhappy about the federal killings. And the feds were very concerned that they were going to be surrounded. And that's part of the reason that they kept working with the Vietnam War hero, Colonel Bo Grice, to try to calm things down with the people who were the gun owners, the activists, and other types who were starting to come in and could have pretty soon outnumbered the federal agents there on the scene.
And I believe you said that they were concerned that this was going to happen at Waco as well, that people were going to come and try and help out the Branch Davidians. And this is what we saw at Bundy Ranch, where people came from many areas. Many of them came from Utah as well. In fact, I'm not sure if you're aware of a gentleman. I actually knew him because he's out in Tooele County in Stockton area. And his name was Bill Keebler, and he would have little survival school homesteading classes at his ranch where they would teach you how to process rabbits, can food, and so on and so forth. But he also was friends with the Finnecums and the Bundys, and he had told me he was going out to Bundy Ranch. He was going to be the head of security there. And we talked on the phone a few times after this. And when he came back, he was a changed person. I asked him, were there snipers with their firearms trained on you? And he said, oh, absolutely. All of us. We were walking around the compound and we could see the agents with their guns pointed at us. And I asked him, did you or anybody under your control at that time, anybody at the ranch, point a firearm in the direction of the government agents? And he said, absolutely. At no time was that allowed. Well, he could have testified to this. He could have participated in these trials. However, he is now in custody. He has been arrested because a confidential informant, a CI working with the FBI, said that he tried to detonate a pipe bomb outside of a BLM office in Salt Lake City. So he is obviously unable to participate in the trial and give that version of what happened to the events. How convenient is that?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that he got nailed by confidential informant. If he's that's a serious charge. Pipe bombs could be called, I think, weapons of mass destruction is how the feds classified him. So if he's innocent and he's clean, I hope he can get off with as soon as possible and with no heavy legal fees and no stupid plea bargain that would say that, well, okay, I didn't do the pipe bomb, but I wrote some angry emails or whatever. So yeah. It's interesting how the pipe bombs have become why there's so much focus on them. I think back to I think back to when I was a teenager. I had an older brother who came home from college, and he has, he was all excited. He learned how to make pipe bombs. And so he would actually make them up in his bedroom. And he and I went out once, and he had a pipe bomb, and I gave it a good throw. It did not detonate. He might have messed up in how he made it, but that was in the 1970s, before I think the federal law was changed. So
yeah,
I would absolutely not do that nowadays. I wouldn't touch a pipe bomb. I would not get within a mile of a pipe bomb. Stay away.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, he became a changed person after Bundy. He said, "They're coming after me. I know something is going to happen." And
Wow.
a funny aside, because we also talk about preparedness here. There was an episode of Doomsday Preppers where a guy was showing on the show, on his segment, how he was making pipe bombs to prepare for unrest. And we were all laughing, going, this guy's getting a visit. But while I do have you here, I will wrap up the show with you if you have a few more minutes with me, because I think this would be intriguing to you as well. There was a young man who was mentally disabled, and the FBI had groomed him as a right-wing terrorist. The accusation here being knowing that he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, I'm looking at one angle of this story, and then the New York Times angle of this same individual is focusing on him as a white 3%er, extreme right-winger, that sort of thing. But they never mentioned that this man had a mental condition. And this story was re-released after the shooting. This came out re-released on the, let's see. Okay, this was originally released in August of 17, so it was re-released just after the shooting here. So it became somewhere in some state, the FBI will announce, and this is how the article starts, that they foiled yet another terrorist plot and saved lives. But there was a story here about a young man in June that a man named Varnell had described himself as a believer in a 3%er ideology, a right-wing group claiming to be committed into standing against exposing injustice and corruption. It turned out that the FBI was working with him, his parents said, knowing that he was a schizophrenic and had mental disorders. If you look at some of these shooters, many of them are on these psychotropic drugs. The FBI did know about them. I want to remind my listeners, on the 21st of this month, of February, I should say, I had a show with Dr. Marianne Block from the Block Center that was talking about the connection between psychotropic drugs and violence. And that's something that our government and the official narrative is really ignoring right now. Have you, in your research and reporting, come across this pattern that we seem to have the FBI working with mentally ill people to try and have these cases come to fruition where we might have charged people?
Yeah, this has happened in a number of the terrorist entrapment cases. The folks at the FBI try to keep generating a lot of snappy press releases and headlines about how the FBI saved people from this, from that, from the other. There was a case in Liberty City out near Miami. There was an FBI informant who set up a group of 5 or 6 guys, and with this crazy terrorist scheme in which they were going to somehow go to Chicago and topple the Sears Tower. But these guys were such morons that they actually asked the FBI informant to get them terrorist uniforms. I mean, these are folks who are absolutely not dangerous, but they were useful for the government to use as a scare tactic to build up support for the FBI. And this is a case that Bob Mueller, when he was FBI chief, made a number of false statements about, saying that this group in Liberty City was self-executing and self-training. That was complete crap, because they were completely created by FBI informants. So yeah, they were dumb guys, and they were probably, you wouldn't want them nearby, but the level of false claims in so many of these terrorist cases and other crackdowns, it boggles the imagination. and yet the media still routinely gives credence to the next FBI press release.
And what do we always get? Well, we need clearly more government funding, more funding for the FBI to keep us safe. You mentioned Mueller and his false statements. What are your thoughts on the fact that we know that somebody that has lied and is now in charge of these investigations to really just go after a duly elected president, and we have a known liar that is in charge of this effort?
Well, I mean, this is not unusual for these kind of federal investigations, but it's striking to me how so much of the media has insisted that Mueller needs to be portrayed as a saint. That there was a Washington Post story, I think last week, that contrasted his life with Trump's life, and here's Mueller in Vietnam and doing this, and he was a prosecutor and this, that, and the other. Well, I mean, folks don't talk about his horrendous screw-ups after 9/11, and he was almost fired in May of 2002, less than a year in the job, because he'd made a number of false statements about the FBI's lack of prior knowledge about these suspicious Arabs getting pilot training at various places in the U.S. There were a lot of other things, and Bob Mueller screwed up the anthrax case immensely, vilified one innocent guy, may have helped drive another innocent guy to suicide. But this is all expunged because now he's doing God's work, going after Trump. And if Trump broke the law, I hope we hear about it. But so much of what Mueller has done and publicized so far is like, this is the best you got? This is it? I mean, show us the Russians. And I don't mean a bunch of troll farms.
And exactly. And we know about some egregious law breaking, systemic egregious law breaking over a lot of time. Yet the head of the Clinton crime syndicate is going to skate, and we have these distractions. I want to, before we run out of time, I want you to let people know how they can follow you, how they can read your articles and purchase your books. Jim Bovard. Okay,
thanks. My website is jimbovard.com, Bovard. I'm on Twitter at Jim Bovard. Got 10 books out there. Some of them, I think most of them are available in Kindle, Amazon. Most of them are available in hard copy as well. Just Google search James Bovard. I use James when I'm writing, but it's out there, and hopefully there'll be a few more stories out shortly that generate lots of hostile comments. You'd mentioned at the start I sometimes write for The Hill. Last piece I did for them got 1,000 comments. Not all of which wanted to hang me.
Well, this is why I love doing our show here. And one of the good things about this alternative source of media is people like you can have a voice out there and actually have an in-depth discussion. As I've said numerous times, when I tell people, please pull away from the mainstream media, or as we also say, unplug from the matrix, and have some time to participate in an analytical discussion. I say the one that you hear on the mainstream media is about as deep as a bird bath, but here we take the time to really delve into these issues. Somebody like Jim Bovard here would never have this amount of time on a corporate network station. So this is important. We really encourage you, when you're listening to this show, I appreciate the positive feedback. I need people that are listening to do more than say great show. As much as I appreciate it, share these shows with your friends. Give your friends a chance to listen to people like Jim Bovard, Dr. Marianne Block, Ryan McMacken. We have important messages that you will not hear elsewhere. JimBovard.com. Follow him. Get those books. You can get them on Amazon. We need to learn the truth. We are at a very dangerous time right now. I'm not sure what direction we're going to go. At some points, I think that it's time to just throw in the towel and enjoy our lives, but I just can't do that right now. Did you have something you wanted to say before we go, Jim?
Thanks for having me on, Suzanne.
Yeah, I really appreciated it. Thank you so much. Well, once again, this has been the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman. If you like this show, please share it with your friends. Subscribe to our YouTube account. We are over here at the Cerberus Radio Network, defending liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Thank you for listening.